Hi, I'm Marshall Dawson. My third discussion with Dave Walden took place on April 20th, 2026. Our original vision for this project was to create some complementary content for Dave's upcoming book, titled Informed by Reason. We wanted a way that Dave's words on the pages could come alive in Dave's own voice, his expressions, and the way that he would expand on his stories. Now, this video wound up being a little bit longer than the first two, but I hope you'll stick around because this one's my favorite. Let me say that one aspect of the book that that caused me to keep reading, and I gave a speech about this at Toastmasters. I don't know if you were there or not.
No, I wasn't.
Talking about the idea of a story file. I've been very frustrated in my adult life that I allowed to escape lots of memories from my childhood. And one thing that was life-changing in the way that I approach speeches now is to use stories, personal stories. And how I have come to reacquire those stories is I would keep a Google Doc open, and every time I'd get a memory, I'd make a quick note in there. Just enough, that I wouldn't forget it again.
Oh, sure.
And that all of a sudden became transformative because the more that I thought about it, the more all these stories and memories started coming back.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah, I find the same thing. When I was thinking about, I think I told you that the most difficult thing that I found in writing that memoir to my daughter and grandchildren is what to include and what to exclude. Because, I say in that book that we each lead three lives, a public one, private one, and a secret one. And I think that's true for all of us. And so I tried to share as much of the public one that I thought would be instructive or useful to them, enough of my private ones so they maybe find it enjoyable, but not damaging.
Yeah.
And virtually none of my secret life. And so that's basically what's in that book. But stories, yeah.
As my story file was growing, I knew that you had written this book. I don't think I'd quite gotten around to reading it yet, but as this Google Doc grew, I started thinking, how am I going to communicate, like who Uncle Marshall was to my nieces and nephew?
Oh.
I don't have a good way to do that. Maybe I should compile this into an autobiography or something like that. But, to me, that just seems like a massive amount of work and effort that I won't get around to doing. But in that context, that's why I found it fascinating reading your book, because you either have, gone out and recollected those memories, but you were at least able to put them down on paper.
Well, the only recollection I did, Marshall, is that I met Julie essentially when I was 43. And she had already had Jesse, who was at the time 4. 3, actually. And so Jesse and I and Julie have grown together from that time on. So my job to recall what is significant to me that I want to leave as memories in their minds of me, and was initially focused on what they had no knowledge of. But only I did, or maybe selected other people who were still alive. So as I went into the past, trying to recall things of significance, it was terribly difficult to remember first, and then to put it into whether it was a secret bucket or not. But as I went on, it got easier and easier, because when I got to the point where I had met Julie and Jesse, and then as she had married and had children, well, they knew a lot of what my life and their life was about. So it got easier in that regard. But at first it was difficult. I've told you that the most difficult thing was to separate what I wanted to say and what I didn't want to say, that would be a potential benefit to them.
Well, I think that there are stories that they will, surely remember from their childhood, like the
Sure.
family camping trips and things
Sure.
like that.
Sure. From their perspective, yeah.
One of the things that I have found fascinating about you and hearing your stories is some of the really compelling ones lead to life lessons. Like the person who threw Atlas Shrugged at you from across the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
That turned out to be life-changing. You want to tell that story?
Well, yeah, I do. I do want to tell that story because this occurred in my final 4th year of the Air Force. And I had already decided that in spite of my earlier life, where I characterize it in the book as having gotten off to a bad start of my own making, I had decided that I would, whatever it took, I would be discharged from the Air Force honorably. Now, honorably didn't mean much to me at the time, right? When I decided, but as the years went by in the Air Force, I worked on aircraft, and that responsibility weighed on me somewhat. So in my 4th year, as I recall in the book, as I was eagerly awaiting my discharge, because the plan was to immediately rejoin my other 4 musicians in South Carolina, so there wasn't much of anything on my mind that took precedence over that. And yet this individual, and I still to this day do not remember his name. I think it was Bill, but I'm not sure of that. And we were in some sort of discussion because he was hardly ever there in the room. As I indicated in the book, I was to discover, not from him, but from others, after he was discharged, that while he was impressive when I talked to him, when he'd be in the room, as I indicate in the book, he had a commercial diver's license while being a sergeant in the Air Force, and apparently had a contract with the Navy in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to repair whatever repairs were needed on their ships while they were in harbor. And that's probably the primary reason that he was never there, hardly, when I was there in the room. And so I guess in response to some discussion we were having, I don't even remember what it was, but I remember he became irritated at me. And he reached over out of his dresser drawer there beside the bed and reached a copy of this book. It was a paperback, and he flung it across the room at me with the admonition to read this. I might even like it. And of course I caught it, and I was shocked really by the whole thing. And it was thick, really thick. And the print was small. Of course, I could read the print then. I couldn't read the small print now. But and so I began reading that book. Now, as I indicated, that I had only read 2 books in my life, and I'm what, 20 years old at the time now, 21, and so reading a book was not on my agenda to do, ever. So because I guess I was impressed by him enough, I started reading it. And of course, if you've read Atlas Shrugged, you know one of Rand's literary styles is she provides an opening statement that ends up having great meaning in the entire fictional story. And I remember in Atlas Shrugged it was, "Who is John Galt?" And okay, I didn't think much of it at the time. But by the time I got to, I always say page 100. I don't remember what page it was, but I was fascinated and stimulated, and I was turned on to continuing reading that book. Something I would have been unimaginable to me before beginning that book. And the rest is history, because now I'm a great student of Rand's philosophy, her ideas, and their application in life. Now, that leads to other stories. I can go on because this isn't in the book, but this relates to this story. I was discharged in the spring of '66 and immediately traveled to South Carolina, met my band. We then went to Atlanta, where we decided that would best serve our fortunes, and it did. But one of the things that I was to see in Atlanta, and I don't remember if it was during that first time, or when we came back to Atlanta, or when I lived in Atlanta, but one of the things that grabbed my attention from being a keyboardist in the band and this new adventure I was on was there were 3 expressways, interstates, that were built or being built in '66 when I got there. There was the Northwest Expressway, I-75, the Northeast Expressway, I-85, and the South Expressway to the airport. Contained both routes. And all of a sudden, one day in one of my travels, I don't remember if it was with the band when we were looking for an agent or just a personal visit or something. I don't remember what we were doing. But here alongside I-85 or I-75, I don't remember which one, was a giant billboard, unremarkable to many others. And all it said on the billboard was, "Who is John Galt?" And that was the opening sentence in Atlas Shrugged. And I was blown away. Now, I subsequently found out that those billboards, the 3 of them, were owned by Ted Turner. And Ted had inherited that advertising business from his dad, and that was put up there to determine the effectiveness or influentialness of those billboards. And that's why it appeared. Now, at some point they were taken down, I don't remember. But then, during that first few months in Atlanta, we discovered that Ted Turner was somebody special because he had just bought apparently Channel 17 in Atlanta, Turner Broadcast, and he had a license to broadcast this new TV station in addition to the other 3, ABC, NBC, CBS, but he only had the license to transmit just so many hours a day. And I can tell you the story that I think you know about, that has to do with when we'd get off work from playing at a club. Particularly, this was Kitten's Corner, the club in Peachtree and 6th in Atlanta. And we get back to the house. The only channel that had anything of interest on, or maybe anything on at that time, was Turner Broadcasting. And he was granted the license, apparently, under the rules that they had to provide so many hours of public service broadcasting, weather, sports, local news, that sort of thing, or news. And one night, I remember we turned on the TV, and of course, all he could broadcast was movies, because he had bought that catalog of movies that he purchased for a huge amount of money. And so the movie finished, as they usually did sometime. When we got home, the movie'd probably be on or been on for some sort of time. I don't remember how much. But when the movie ended, either he or his partner, and his partner at that time was a guy named Bill Tush, I remember him because of his last name, Bill Tush. They would be on camera reading either the news or the sports or the weather and fulfilling their obligations to the FCC to provide local broadcasting of interest, not just movies. So that's what they would do. And it wouldn't last long before they'd either go off the air or introduce the next movie. Right? And one night when we turned it on, the movie had ended, and here was, instead of Bill Tush or Ted Turner, they had put a German Shepherd on camera and given him peanut butter or something because the shepherd was sitting there moving his mouth, and either Tush or Turner, I don't remember who, was reading the news in the background. And we just thought that was hilarious. I remember that. But anyway, that's a story that didn't make the cut in the book.
Wow.
But anyway. So Atlas Shrugged, yes, was absolutely, it awakened my darkened soul.
Part of the reason that I feel that was a good story to start off with is it's an example of how something can happen that just seems completely inane in the moment, but you don't know how it's going to affect you, what it's going to turn you into later as you develop. And I use the example all the time that you don't know what opportunities are beyond a choice that you haven't made or a commitment you haven't made yet. But I mean, in that case, it was barely a choice to start reading, and then you couldn't stop.
Excellent point. And I'll throw something else in addition to that. I have told that story to a number of people in the course of my life, because they ask how I discovered Ayn Rand and her ideas and so forth, and that's how I discovered them. And they'll make a remark in response along the lines of, boy, you were lucky that guy threw you that book. And I always respond that, yes, I was fortunate that occurred. But I was also fortunate that he must have seen something in me and decided maybe this would be a great opportunity for me, although I'm sure he was frustrated and his motivation was to get me out of his hair or something like that. And my point in bringing this up is that one of my philosophical principles, and I'm not religious, but I share this with Judeo-Christian theology, is that we each have moral agency. We are responsible for the course of our lives. Now, yeah, you can get up in the morning and walk out the door and be hit by a bolt of lightning and killed or injured. You have no control over that, right? Or little, or if any. But that's an exception, a great exception. The overwhelming occurrences that you experience, you remain in control of what they will develop into, if anything. Mm-hmm. And so that philosophical principle that I have learned, I have related to Bill, if that's his name, threw that book at me. In that I was not even aware, but he was, by some measure, and my reaction to that book and reading the words and thinking about what it meant is my agency. Yeah, I'm fortunate. Like everyone that's born and living in this country at this time is fortunate they're here and not in some hellhole around the world. But it's what you do with that, if you even recognize it, that is your responsibility, your agency, your moral agency, leading to your life and its course.
You said that was toward the end of your service, right?
Yeah.
Now, in the book, you mentioned that when you join the Air Force, they go through all the usual rituals of stripping you of your individuality. Were you still sufficiently stripped of that? I mean, do you think
Oh
you
no,
were ripe at
that
that
only
point in
went
time?
so deep. I mean,
Okay.
one of the decisions they made, if they're going to invest, they being the military is going to invest, in this case the Air Force, in you, and they sent me to Lowry after basic training for almost a year. I don't remember exactly how long it was, to train me on the system that I would be expected to maintain and repair when I got assigned to my duty station. One of the things they want to know soon, I don't remember how soon, is do you intend to re-enlist?
Interesting.
Because they don't want to lose that investment. Now, obviously, depending on technology, that goes away with some fields of training, but I don't pretend to know when that is. But I was in an area that I was repeatedly, as well as others, asked if I had any intention to re-enlist. And I knew very early in my 4 years that I had no intention of re-enlisting, none whatsoever. It wasn't even an issue. So, as I got my last duty station and transferred up to New Hampshire from South Carolina, uh, uh, my discharge was foremost in my mind. Now, when I finished Atlas Shrugged, I reread it because it had such an impact on me. But the dominant thing in my mind at that time was getting out of the Air Force and rejoining my fellow band members. I mean, I was discharged one day, and the next, after going home, after being discharged, the next day I was on a train for South Carolina. I'm now, in all fairness, I had been coming home on the weekend because it was close, with my mother and father and whatever remained of my local friends. There wasn't many, because I stated in the book that when I came home after 6 months in the Air Force, all of my friends were still there, and I enjoyed the 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks. And after I returned to Lowry for the next half of my training, 4 of them enlisted, and I have never seen them again or even heard from them. So I don't know what happened, but no, I had no intention of ever re-enlisting in the Air Force. And that military is not for me.
Yeah, at this point, knowing you, it's hard to imagine that you ever did that voluntarily anyway.
Well, it was with the I'll call it prodding, if not insistence, of my mother, who obviously, when mom and dad must have thought what the future was going to be like for their son, they didn't have good thoughts. They were probably just consumed with apprehension and fear and so forth. So she was the one that really pushed hard on me enlisting in the military. And of course, I was 17, and I had a bunch of friends I didn't want to, but this is something I didn't put in the book either. She was pregnant with my brother at the time. And at one point, she may have expressed that she was concerned about being able to deliver this baby over the anguish being caused her by me and my behavior, which was pretty obnoxious.
I had a coworker, his son up and enlisted in the Army, and it was the best thing that ever happened to him. He really matured quickly, and last I heard, he's a very successful adult now. That was very influential and very helpful.
Well, the option of going in the military is the option that living in America has always availed itself to anyone that thought it would be a good idea. Now, I don't presume to know what the development and maturing of a child should or ought to entail. I do know presume to know, that the earlier they accept the responsibility for their moral agency, as I call it, the better off they'll be. Because basically people will behave rationally if they discover that it's rational to behave that way. And why? And I apparently never discovered until going in the Air Force that I needed to change some things. Now, separating that from him throwing me a copy of Atlas Shrugged, obviously before I got to read Atlas Shrugged, I had already discovered music and my ear for it. When I transferred from South Carolina, I could play keyboard in maybe not a studio band, but any band playing clubs I probably could, and bass, because I had learned to play bass as well. And basically I did that without instruction, although I always mentioned that black guitar player that I ran into in the service club named Jackson. I remember him, and him teaching me how to play chords on the guitar and then showing me on the piano. So the point being, Marshall, when you go in the military in America, it's at a time of your life that others are attending college or starting a trade or something at a time when it's significant. And so I wish it had happened earlier, but it didn't. But I took advantage of it in the best way I was able when it did happen. And of course, Atlas Shrugged is in a class by itself.
Well, I think that all comes back to what you've said so far, which is, we have agency. And did you say we'll be reasonable as much as it's reasonable, or we'll be rational as much as we...
Well, I use the word rational, and the context is important, but it's an obtuse context, at least I would argue it is, and that's this. By the time you reach that age, you already, to some significant degree, get it. Now, what do I mean by it? You know that, like the old commercial for butter, not margarine, it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. Mother Nature, when a human being is dealing with nature, a human being doesn't mess around. They come to understand that nature's unforgiving, remorseless. There's no good and bad, there just is what is. And if you fool around with Mother Nature in the wrong way, there's consequences that are inescapable. You're not going to... I don't care how smart or clever you think you are, you're not going to survive, or worse. However, when dealing with other human beings, the intelligence that gets it sooner rather than later somehow thinks they're smarter than most other human beings. And so they hold values and exhibit behavior that they're not forced to question. Atlas Shrugged forced me to question my behavior. And that occurred to me after reading it twice in the Air Force.
You also made me think about, I'll use a different coworker's son as another example. He has big dreams of doing something one day, and yet he does nothing about it. He's become comfortable with his status in life, which is working a very blue-collar job for very little money, not going to go anywhere. It's not going to develop a career. He's not starving to death, but yet he has not awakened to the fact that that he needs to take action. The saying, "If it is to be, it is up to me," just came to mind. I don't think he's gotten that yet.
Well, yeah, that it's funny you mentioned that, because there has been someone, and I'm not going to state who I've come to know recently in life, and someone else that I know asked me what I thought of them. I get asked that by a lot of people. I don't know why. I mean, I rarely ask that of someone, but I do at times. But I seem to get it often. And my response is will maybe be helpful in answering your point. My response was, well, it's likely life will continue to happen to them as it has already, and they will make very little of life happen. And that's my opinion of them. Now, would that have been my fate had I not had that book thrown at me and then chosen to react the way I did to it? I like to think, but I'll never know. I like to think that something else would have grabbed my attention and I would have acted on that, but I don't know that. That may be very self-serving in my mind.
Yeah, we can never know.
No, you never know.
Maybe that day that you were home reading by yourself, you would have otherwise been out driving and witnessed a car accident, and that would have inspired you to have been a doctor, Dave.
Who knows?
Dr. Dave, how about that?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. No, that's it. I never consciously deny what is possible, and to the extent I do, I try to offer evidence for why my denial, just like I offer evidence for what I choose to believe. You know, I mentioned the other night, I think at our cigar smokeout to Josiah, was that his name? That I sometimes, when I'm at Toastmasters, ask the volunteer the question, how do you determine the difference between what you choose to believe and what you claim to know? And of course, to me, that's a very important fundamental question, because we all believe many things. We also believe we know many things. What's the difference? And of course, to me, is the evidence, and what constitutes evidence, and why it's evidence, and why it's not.
Well, there's something that I wanted to mention. I don't know if this will unlock any stories. Your career in the music industry. I don't think I've ever told you this, but when I was in high school, I was 100% convinced that I intended to move to Canada after I graduated and become involved with the music industry there.
Wow.
I don't know why Canada, except I was a big fan of Rush back in those days.
Sure.
And there was a Canadian band, their name escapes me. Maybe that's how I chose Canada. And then, and then a series of bad decisions and lack of direction. I think I have told you some of that story before. The result was that I didn't do it. Well, anyway, now for some reason, YouTube videos about the music industry and what makes for good music and studio setups and things like that have been popping up on my radar. So it's been sort of fascinating looking at some of that. There was, I think I did tell you the story about the documentary, the Wrecking Crew. Did I tell you this already?
Yes.
Yeah. And Brad said, "Oh yeah, I donated money for that." But that was pretty fascinating.
Well, what was fascinating to me is he was on a video.
Well, he wasn't on there, but his name was.
The name was,
Yeah,
right.
he was in the credits.
Yeah. Well, that Wrecking Crew was quite a studio band. I think I told you our favorite studio band was the Stax Studio Band in Memphis. We loved R&B, all of us, and Rick could sing it well. The only limitation Rick had is he didn't have a high voice, he had a baritone voice. So if he did something really high, it had to be in a falsetto. But Murray and I could back him up in harmony pretty good, as long as our voices weren't out there all by themselves. We sounded pretty good. But no, the Stax Studio Band is what lit our fire. And the reason is that we were in the South during the 60s. And of course, there was a lot of that racial crap going on in the South. And I even witnessed it one time in a Waffle House in the South, and I just was incensed. But anyway, be that as it may, the Stax Studio Band was Booker T and the MGs. That was their name, because they had a couple of hits. Green Onions was one of their hits in like 61 or 2, I don't remember. And that was the genre of music that I really liked, the R&B. And by the mid to late 60s, the Stax record label had become a big name in the industry. And part of the reason was that band, 4 of them, 2 white guys and 2 black guys. The 2 white guys, Steve Cropper and Doug Dunn, were in the Blues Brothers movie, because the movie, if you remember, was partly the band.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And that was who they had representing it. But the other 2 guys in Booker T and the MGs were Booker T, the keyboard player, and I think at the time a guy named Al Jackson being the first name of the guy that taught me in the service club in the military there on his guitar. But so we got to where we could hear when a new record came out whether it was likely recorded at Stax or not, because of the sound of that band. And to give you an idea, the musicians that recorded it at Stax that became famous were Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, Sam and Dave, Eddie Floyd, Rufus and Carla Thomas, and there were others. And the music all had this sound that we loved. They had horns in a lot of them, and the horns was a group of horn players, the Marquets, I think is what they were called. And we got to where, oh, that's from Stax, and now the horns made it difficult for us to play them, the song, and be good at it. But we did a number of the stuff that they put out under that label, and it sounded pretty good, and whatever I could do on the Hammond to make it sound like horns, I tried to do, But yeah, we just loved the sound coming out of the Stax record label. We even, on one of my family's later trips in 2015 or something, we actually went through Memphis, and while some of them went to Graceland to see Elvis's, the historic memories triggered by Elvis's fame, I paid tickets for everybody to go to the Stax studio. And we all spent an afternoon in the Stax studio. The Stax studio was gone, But when it was originally made into a studio, it had been a movie theater. And one of the reasons that some people claim for the sound coming out of there is the sloped concrete floor in there that was part of the movie theater.
Wow.
Where the band would play. And I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know enough about it, but I know the sound was unique out of that record label, and we loved it. When we were in the musician, they had Steve Cropper's guitar there. He was the guitar player. They had Booker T's Hammond organ. I think everybody thought Booker played a B3, which is the Entertainer's version of Hammond organ, but he played an M100 actually. I'm probably going into way too much detail, and one of the hits that we played was "Knock on Wood" by Eddie Floyd. Now, Eddie Floyd was a recording artist for Stax. Knock on Wood's on the Stax label, but not many people know that on that cut, a young black kid walked into the studio and got to hanging around in there who could play keyboard, and on the piano in that recording, I have read, I didn't know at the time, but I have since read, was that young black kid that turned out to be famous. And I'm thinking of his name, because in the studio, as part of the museum, was his gold Cadillac. A gold Cadillac. It was incredible. Isaac Hayes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's where he broke in, Isaac Hayes. So anyway, yeah, you can see how I was excited about joining the band, and how even though Atlas Shrugged had lit my fire, it kind of went into the background because of my looming discharge and joining the band and all that.
Well, this is really getting off on a tangent now, but when we sat down at my house, we were talking about things that can make somebody, if not immortal, live past their passing. And I brought up music. You were bringing up books and writings and things like that. But, it's interesting because, I can see you light up when you talk about this.
Oh, yeah.
Isaac Hayes is gone. Many of the others are gone now.
Oh, yeah.
And we still talk about
them.
We still listen.
While we were still playing, Otis Redding was killed in a plane crash. And, and we weren't friends of Otis. He came into a club we were playing at one time in Atlanta. And, and Rick in the microphone introduced that Otis was in there. Everybody went crazy and everything, But we didn't know him. But when we heard he had been killed in that plane crash, it was a big deal to us. But yeah, most of them are gone now.
Yeah.
Most of them are gone.
I watched another documentary last night about backup singers, and particularly black backup singers.
Yeah.
But watching that as well as the Wrecking Crew and hearing the music, it's just it was.
Oh, yeah.
It was impactful.
Yeah. You're right. But the backup singers are a lot of groups. My favorite, hands down, my favorite writer of hit songs during my era of appreciation of such things is hands down Burt Bacharach.
Mm.
And if I went down a list of songs that were hits by different artists that he wrote the music to, and maybe in the studio, I don't know, maybe he orchestrated it too, I don't know that. He produced a few, or many. But most people associate Burt Bacharach with Dionne Warwick, because he and Hal David, I think was his name, or David, and it was Hal David, they wrote all the music and lyrics to virtually all of her hits, Dionne Warwick, and she had hits for years, right? And I loved Dionne Warwick. One of the reasons I loved her is because Bacharach had written the music. And I could tell Bacharach. I mean, you remember the Carpenters?
Sure.
Well, David Carpenter, Karen's brother, is that his first name, David? No, I don't think it was, but her brother, whatever his name was, he acknowledged one time the influence Bacharach had on his playing. And if you listen to the Carpenters' songs, you can hear that influence in what he's playing. I mean, their first hit record, Close to You, was written by Bacharach. It had appeared on a Dionne Warwick album. I don't know where they got it from, the Carpenters, but they turned it into a single hit. And it's also on one of Dionne Warwick's albums. But I mean, I can remember discovering Bacharach. I mean, I don't know if you remember this song. It's probably before your time. But it was by the Shirelles, which was a black group. And it was in, I think, the late 50s that it was a hit called Baby It's You. And Bacharach wrote that. Okay? And then from there he wrote, who knows how many, but he wrote Gene Pitney stuff turned into a hit. One of them is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. That was a Bacharach tune. Okay, Gene Pitney sang it, as well as other hits he had. Only Love Can Break the Heart was one. And then he wrote, and I didn't know he had written it at the time, but when I was married to my first wife, before we were married actually, we both loved music, the same kind. And one of her favorite tunes was, unless you're an R&B fan, an obscure song by a guy named Chuck Jackson. And the title of it was Any Day Now. And Bacharach wrote that song, and I loved it, she loved it, and our singer in the band could sing the hell out of that. I mean, he sounded fabulous. And of course, it has a little organ part in it that I did, right? So that was one of our, but Bacharach, I mean, I don't want to go into all the songs that he's responsible for, because he was just in a class by himself. And of course, he recently died, and that was a big deal to me. So he lives on, though, as your point was.
Yeah. I guess closing the loop on music, when I was growing up and was interested in music, I didn't appreciate the songwriters. I don't think I ever even knew who they were on the music that I was buying. Of course, most of the music that I was buying was on CDs, and we didn't quite have the liner covers that you would have had with the LPs. You know. Right. There was barely enough room for lyrics in those things.
Well, most of my records were 45s.
Oh, okay.
I didn't even buy albums till later on, after I was in the Air Force. Then albums became more important. But yeah, that's where a lot of my paper route money went. That's 45s.
Right. Yeah. I might have bought some 45s when I was a young kid. But no, I mean, as a teenager and an adult, I preferred albums because to me that symbolized like an entire story that the artist was trying to tell.
Sure. I think my interest in albums waned when I decided to leave being a musician, and I was hired by IBM because I don't remember buying albums after that, although my wife did, Alicia. She bought some. And I remember our favorite place to play was Huntsville, Alabama. And that was for a number of reasons, one of which is they just loved us in Huntsville. There were 2 clubs there, and when they would book us, the places would fill up and the owners would make good bucks. Okay? Now, I won't tell you about one of them because one of them was owned by the Southern mob and we didn't know it at the time. And they stopped hiring us at one point, but we continued to be hired at the other club. And one of the people coming into that club all the time was the owner of the Dodge dealership in Huntsville. And he found out that I was looking for a new car. Because at the time, we were driving my wife, Alicia's, 62 Volkswagen Beetle, right? And of course, it was a nice little car, but you couldn't get heat out of it in the winter. And so he found out, and he made it a point to tell me if I would buy a Dodge, he'd make me a great deal on it. So I looked at Dodge, and of course, it just so happened that the 68 Dodge Charger was beautiful. So I ordered a Dodge Charger from his dealership, and I ordered it just the way I wanted it. And one of the things that I ordered in it at the time was an 8-track tape player, which was like, unusual at the time. And I did so because 8-tracks were out, and I loved music. It was relative to my career, right? And I'm telling you this because the last 3 albums I remember that I bought were 8-track tape albums of the Beatles. It was Sgt. Pepper's, Magical Mystery Tour, and Abbey Road, which was my favorite of all. Now, they came out with other albums after that, but Abbey Road was the one. And I would play that on my 8-track tape player in my Dodge Charger until I got rid of it.
I was going to ask when you got rid of it.
Oh, God, in the 70s.
Yeah.
I don't remember when exactly, but I got rid of it because I wrecked it. And I didn't like how it was fixed, and it was going to cost me a lot to fix it like the way I wanted it, and I said no. And I was using it at the time with IBM, and it wasn't a good car to use for my territory.
Sure.
Anyway, and so I was ready for another car. It had a lot of miles on it when I had it, but it was one of my all-time favorite. I wish I had it now.
Well, so I don't know if you're like me and kind of wonder about old possessions, like my cars that I've had. Where are they now? Are they still around? I can remember looking at a vintage photo of a 69 Camaro.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd seen this on Facebook. And I think I reposted it and said, we can only guess where this is now. Was it crushed and recycled? Do some of the parts that, you see in this picture, were they salvaged, and are they part of your Camaro?
Right, sure.
So anyway, thinking about the 68 Charger, who knows? Maybe it was, one of the General Lees that they used on the Dukes of Hazzard.
That was a 69, but yes.
Well, they started getting pretty short on cars to use for that because they crashed so many. So they were they were piecing together cars from different years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Sure. That TV series went on for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's only one thing that I could have bought that I didn't, that I wanted. And that was a car that I always wanted. One of my cars was a badly restored 61 Pontiac Catalina convertible. And what I always wanted was a perfectly restored 61 Bonneville convertible. And I had a chance to buy one here not too long ago, and I didn't, and I regret not buying it. So I could buy it now, but it'd be more trouble than it's worth, and it's probably past time to do that.
You brought up IBM a moment ago. Tell the story about the one condition that, upon your hire, that they demanded of you?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, when I came home from leaving the band, I announced to the band, of course, my wife and I, Alicia, had talked about it, and she was, I won't say ambivalent, but she essentially said, well, if that's what you want to do, then do it. So she supported me in it. But the last job we had was in Clearwater, Florida, for a month on the beach. And it was in the early spring, late spring, but down there it was warm and the sun was out all the time. And I came back to Atlanta at our home, unemployed because I had resigned, with a deep tan. I mean, a deep tan. And of course I looked in the paper for work, and the only thing I saw that I thought I might be able to do well, that might pay some good money, was if this incredible company that I had known about, IBM, because at that time, IBM was the premier computer company in the world, let alone America, and well thought of and everything. But they had this ad, mechanical knowledge and experience needed, electrical useful. So I called the number, and they gave me an appointment to come down, and it was on a Friday that I was to come down to their office on Peachtree Street in Atlanta. And so I went. I had a suit. I put on a suit and tie and shined my shoes and everything and went down to interview for this job opportunity. And I remember I walked in and the receptionist greeted me. And I remember since I wrote the book, her name was Linda. I remember her last name. Her name was Linda. And Linda was drop dead gorgeous. Okay? And she took a look at me, and at the same time I think I was thinking how gorgeous she was. She took note of a guy with a suit and tie and a beard, because nobody at IBM had a beard, right?
That's right.
And so she was curious. She asked me a number of questions about that, and we talked. But then she brought me to the manager who was going to interview me, and he talked to me and then gave me the test. And so apparently I did well on the test, and he said, now normally he says I would make the decision, but the branch manager wants to speak with you to make the decision on whether we're going to offer you a job or not. I said, okay. So I waited a while. It took a long time, but I finally was shown into the branch manager's office, and he said, well, Dave, he said, IBM would like to offer you a job, but we have a condition that you have to understand and agree to. Do you think you might be interested in that condition? And I said, of course. I was looking for a job when I responded. I'm still looking. And he said, well, as you know, IBM is a conservative company, and we dress with white shirt, tie, and we want to project that image in all of our employees. And so the condition that you must meet is you have to be willing to shave off your beard. Are you willing to do that? I said, of course. I'm looking for a job. Now, he didn't know I hadn't interviewed anywhere else for anything else. So I said, of course. And so he said, fine, we're looking forward to it. Please come back Monday morning, and we'll start you on your materials before school. You'll be going to school be trained on the equipment and so forth. And I said, great, shook hands and left. And got home. Alicia was thrilled that IBM was hiring this musician, right? And so Monday morning, I go back down, in my spit-shine shoes and suit and tie, white shirt, and I walk into Linda at the reception desk, and she looks up at me and laughs. I said, Linda, what are you laughing at? She said, your white streaks down your cheeks, because I was. I mean, everywhere I had the beard was white compared to my deep tan. And so I did look funny. So that's how I got hired at IBM.
I've heard that story a couple of times now, and the first time that I heard it from you, bear in mind, I've only known you for, I'm going to say 9 years, and you've always had a white beard. And when you told the story and you said, "Well, my cheeks were white," I'm thinking they're always white, but I had not kind of placed you in that context of back when it was. I guess it would have been the mid to late 70s or so. And
It was 1968.
oh, that you went to IBM. Yeah, I guess it would have been. And if I try to picture you with a dark beard, right, and being a musician in that decade, it certainly makes a lot more sense.
I've got a picture of me and the band taken in 1967, I think. And you'll perhaps get some idea. I'm going to ask you to pick out which one is me. Now, you'll pick it out, I'm sure. But there are people that I've given that picture to that they said, "I don't know," and they guess. And sometimes they guess me, and sometimes they don't. But go ahead and keep talking. I'll look for this because it takes me a while to find
Well,
stuff.
I was just going to say that in Brad's photos of he and his fellow musicians, it's difficult to pick him out.
I'll bet. I have to go
Mhm.
through a bunch of them, but I found it finally, and I'll show you the picture of our band and me.
Probably the only one with a beard, but I was going to say I think that I've taken this test before.
Okay. Now, we're all on stairs. You can't
Yeah.
tell that. We're standing on, I think I told you that once before.
I think so. Yeah.
Because the guy on the right is a singer, and he stood 6'6". But you'd never know. And the other guys were pretty tall. I was one of the shorter ones. Anyway.
Yeah, that's great. You seem to have a lot of relationships. Bob Armstrong, Tony, Rick, that were meaningful. So I was not going to ask necessarily stories about them per se, but if you have any thoughts on forming relationships and whether that, results in success.
I have found that, in one sense, regarding relationships, I am unremarkably normal. And yet I'm told and reminded, particularly by my brother-in-law, that my relationships, at least with respect to the Tony and Steve, my two fellow property owners in Georgia that I met when I joined IBM, and whose friendships have been steady through that time. And Tony, we bought property together and built our retirement places together. And Steve, right alongside us with the next acreage up, is unusual. He said he's only had one friend that he's known since he was in college, that he still knows, and that he mentioned. Now, he may know more than that. I'm sure he does. But he found that significant in me. Even the band members, while they were, I would call them friends, they never became close like Tony became when I met Tony. Now, knowing Tony as I do, I doubt that Tony would mention me in an emotional context of being a wonderful friend, because Tony's just not like that. Tony was somebody that I came to admire and respect for what he did and was capable of, and then it was brutally honest. And that's what guided him, is he did not have any friends that he let close to him that he did not trust. And even then, I'm not sure of the limits of his trust. Okay? I, on the other hand, when I have someone that I let close to me, it's because primarily I trust them. The people you mention, Tony, Rick, Bob Armstrong. I don't mention Steve much in the book because when I think of Steve, it's in the context of Tony, and I always mention Tony, right? But Steve was a good friend too. I don't have many close friends and never have, and frankly, I've never wanted for them. As you know, I've indicated, and as I perhaps state in the book, I don't remember stating it as such, but I'm entirely comfortable by myself, alone. When I was a boy, my early love, the only thing I can remember that I loved was being alone in the woods in New Hampshire, and that's in the book, and I loved it. Okay, now that, obviously that changes. I played baseball, and you're on a team, right? Okay. But close friends are few and far between. Probably now the closest people that would come to that are those that I've met at Toastmasters, you being one. You've gotten to know me more than most people get to know me. My brother-in-law has become a close friend.
There are friends, and there are sometimes friends that you spend more time with than other friends. But there also can be people who you are in a relationship with who you either grow with, kind of concurrently, or you're in that relationship long enough that something rubs off. And the way you described Tony, perhaps, I don't know if you'd characterize him this way, with his lack of trust and that type thing. The way he comes across in the book almost sounds like it was a bit of a mentoring relationship to you, even though
didn't know. He'd be appalled if you suggested to him that he mentored me.
Well, and I would never suggest that.
No, but I mean that's Tony. Tony was.
Yeah. Which is not to say I don't think that you didn't learn quite a bit from
Tony.
Tony.
God, I learned. I can't tell you what I learned from Tony.
That's what I'm getting at.
I learned very few of my important philosophical values from Tony. What I learned from Tony was the practical living of life and and how he displayed that as a fellow IBM employee, both on the job and off the job. Tony, there wasn't hardly anything he couldn't do. I'll give you an example of Tony's limitations. Tony never read books, hardly at all. Okay. He worked for his father's truck company growing up. He worked before he went in the Air Force. He went in the Air Force just like I did. He worked on B-52s, on radios and B-52s, and got discharged. Then I met him at IBM. And Tony, he just knew how to do stuff, or he learned how to do it and did it. He was probably the best IBM CE that I ever knew. Now, I say that knowing that Steve was damn good too, CE. But Tony did not like to read books. And he called me at one time his interesting hippie buddy, because I was a musician. And he knew I had a beard and everything. I saw pictures and stuff. And I suggested to him one time that he ought to read Atlas Shrugged because he struck me as one of the characters in Atlas Shrugged. Not not as a thinker, as a doer. And he read it, and it was hard for him because he's not a reader, and there was enough interest in the story that he finished it. And I came to find out that he never read books, but he read the book that I had suggested to him. My brother-in-law has an interesting phrase that he uses to characterize relationships. He calls it serve and volley. You meet someone that you send a serve to them, and they hit it back to you. And then you hit it back to them. And he says that relationships develop and build between people that have successful serve and volleys. And it continues.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I got it too when he used it. I've told him that.
And, some people you serve to just let the ball go right on by.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or they take this ineffectual swing at it and miss. Or they hit it into the court in front of the net.
Right.
Or sometimes they give it back and you've got to go out of your way to deal with it.
Mm.
Well, what you're doing is you're prompting me to review what I've left out. My drinking from Bob Armstrong's fire hose when he offered me the job at IBM okay. There's lots of stories. I mean, it was very hilarious. And right after he offered me the job and I accepted it, the new department that he managed, one of them had a softball team. And I liked ball. I hadn't played ball since, only occasionally, since I was a little leaguer playing baseball. So I volunteered to join the department softball team. And first game, they put me in left field. I think I said that's where I wanted to play because I'm fast and I could catch. And I'm running down a fly ball and I pull a hamstring right after getting in the department. So now, not only am I a novice on the craft that this department is expected to perform and deliver, but I'm on crutches. Going to a meeting becomes a big deal, how far I got to walk, right? So there's stuff like that. There's so many other things, like Rick, my buddy in Pueblo, or one of my cars. I mean, I went to work after I retired. Rick had started a business down there. This is well after he didn't buy into that business that you read about in the book, and he hired me to consult for his business because he actually put me on a higher level than I thought I deserved. But I agreed and I consulted with him on his business for a couple of years. And there's all kinds of stories about that down there that I chose not to go into because the kids and Jesse would, okay. And so I didn't go into that and had no intention of going into that. There's stories with my Viper that Jesse knew about and wanted, and we actually talked about that. Yesterday they took me to lunch for my birthday. And so I spent lunch and a good time after it, Goodfellas in Longmont, on my birthday lunch with Jesse and the girls and Nick. And she brought up the Viper. Somebody brought up the Viper. And, of course, she wanted to use the Viper for her prom, and I wouldn't let her. And at the time, that commercial by Dodge where the kid asked the father of the daughter, "Hey, can we use the Viper for our prom?" That's where Jesse, I think, got the idea. You remember that commercial?
I can't recall the commercial.
Okay, well, it was. It was a commercial about a
Yeah.
Dodge Viper.
I'd forgotten that you'd had a Viper as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
bought it from Mark, my brother-in-law.
From Mark? you
From
said?
him.
Okay.
He had bought it. Now, I'll tell you, this is not in the book, and maybe this is the kind of stuff you want to hear. I don't know. I know I can tell it. But, yeah, one visit to Mark, he gave me a ride in his Viper. And you can imagine what the ride was like. Okay? Now, he didn't do anything crazy, but he demonstrated its performance, and he knew I was a car guy and loved performance. And I said, geez, this is something, Mark, if you ever want to sell it, because when Julie and I were married, one of our marriage presents to each other was a car that Mark owned that wanted to sell. Okay? And he drove it up here for our wedding and attended our wedding. He was the only member of Julie's family that attended the wedding in the car. And it was a BMW 635i, the coupe, the sport coupe. You remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that was our first car that we bought from Mark. Well, when he gave me the ride in the Viper, this was years later, and I said, hey, if you ever want to sell it, let me know. Well, he let me know. Now, the story on the car was he had bought it at salvage with a salvage title. Apparently, and I don't know, Mark told me that he was told that the car was driven into an irrigation ditch after it was stolen. And that's why it had a salvage title. It needed a whole bunch of work because of the damage and water and whatever. Well, if you know Mark, when Mark owns something, it's first class. And he's got the wherewithal to make it first class if it's not. And he had made that, I would say he made that car better than it was when it was new. So he asked me if we wanted to buy it, and Julie and I talked, and so I said, yeah. We drove down there with our truck and a trailer and loaded it on the trailer, and I built a shield for it down there so no rocks could get at it, and brought it back from Houston to Colorado. And that's the Viper that Jessie wanted to know if she could use for the prom. But somebody asked me, well, how long did you have it? I said, well, I had it 3 years. And how many miles did you put on it? I mean, not many, just 3,000 in maybe 3 years. But I said I put them on it at a quarter mile at a time. Because that's what you did when you got into Viper.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bob Armstrong. I gave him a ride in it, but I gave his wife a ride in it. And I didn't know it, but I scared her to death. He told me later that I scared her, and I was sorry for that, because it could be scary. Safely, but scary.
Well, the Viper was transformative when it came out.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to American performance.
Yeah, that I scared Bob's wife, and I think I sold it shortly after that. I'm not sure, but I did sell it after several years, and of course it was gorgeous still, just impractical. I sold it to a guy who had his own company here in Arvada somewhere. I don't remember. I never talked to him again. But he bought it. He didn't even argue price or anything. He just bought it because it was that night. Mark is when Mark has a car and wants to sell it, you'd be a fool not to buy it because he'll tell you what's wrong with it and what isn't.
Yeah.
And, so I talk a lot about Mark because Mark has become a very close friend.
And I suspect another example of somebody that you've grown alongside with as you've gotten to know him.
I think we have, yeah. Now, when I say, I think I've said, and I may say in the book, I don't know, that I'm not sure I mentioned Mark in the book. I think I do a couple places. Serve and Volley certainly in there, and I've given the credit to Mark because I didn't come up with that. But Mark is religious. He's a good Christian, prides himself on being one, and he is indeed, I would say that. I trust him explicitly, implicitly, and he and I have gotten close, even though I am not religious or a good Christian. And that's a difference, but that we both understand and recognize, and we've become close in spite of that. And I think that's what most people should do, unless the two, what they don't share in common is so utterly opposite they can't. I mean, obviously an honest man can't be friends with a dishonest one. And I mean that in the fullest extent of honesty.
Yeah.
Not just, keep a nickel, you lose. I don't mean money just necessarily, but other things.
I can't recall if we talked about it in one of our other sit-downs, but tell the story about when you went to meet with your father-in-law. And
that's in the book. I made sure that's in the book for Jesse.
Oh, it definitely is.
It is. It's definitely in the book. And because that is instructive, potentially instructive, on a whole host of levels. And there's some of that I'll go into, and there's other aspects that I won't. Only those that are already in the book. But my father-in-law at the time, my future father-in-law, thought it was another terrible decision by his daughter to marry me. And that had remained in his mind and his behavior and treatment toward his daughter until after that meeting. Maybe before that meeting, but it hadn't manifested. Okay, I don't know. I'll never know. But when I say it's instructive on a number of levels, when you read it, the obvious level presents itself. It's why Francis put it in his book. But there's another more important one. In my mind, more important. And it answered my questions subsequent to that meeting as he and I were building what became a wonderful relationship for 33 or 4 years after that meeting with him. And that's this. A Christian's philosophy, if they practice what they believe is true, will try to lead others who are not Christians into becoming a Christian. And of course they'll say it's for their benefit. And you and I both know about things like that. We've talked about that, who's benefit and who's not, right? And so subsequent to that meeting, when we'd meet and we'd enjoy each other and talking and doing things. I mean, one time we went camping together west of Trinidad, and up there was a source of coal for the Colorado Foundry and Iron Steel Mill that had been created by General Palmer, who built the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. And there are remnants of the source for the coal and the coke ovens and all that to the west of Trinidad. And he and I spent an entire day walking over those ruins and looking at them, and both being fascinated and sharing our interest and views about that with each other. It was a wonderful day. And, before he died, he talked about a number of people about what a great day that was in front of me, and I do the same. But that's the kind of relationship we had. But he would also, at times, he wouldn't approach me like he did on that initial meeting that's in the book, but he would approach me tangentially to that, about discovering Christ and other things like that, Christian religion. And so finally one day, when I think he was visiting here, we might have been on that deck, because he and I built the deck out here together.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I said to him, Van, and I may have told you this story, Van, if I could prove to you there was no God, would you believe it? And he looked at me and he says, you can't do that. And I said, well, I know I can't. But if I could, would you believe it? He said, well, how would you do it? I said, Van, I've already acknowledged that I can't prove that. I'm just asking if I could, would you believe it? And he said, well, if I could prove to you there was a God, would you believe it? I said, well, of course I would. And that caused him to think a little bit. And we were smoking out there. And he was either with a cigar or pipe in it, because I remember he was puffing it. And he thought about it, and I could tell, because he was deep in thought. And he ended up saying, well, I would have to, of course I would. And what that told me, as long as he was telling me the truth, was that he was someone of reason, and he prided himself on being a reasonable man. He taught his daughter and his kids to be rational.
Yeah.
You know, always be rational, and that's what he'd say and admonish. And he was confirming to me his rationality. Now, if he'd have said to me, I'm sorry, no, I wouldn't believe that, then our relationship probably would have taken a different course. We would not have remained as close as we did, but we still would have had a relationship because of the other things that relationship depended upon.
It just would have been different.
Right. And that's the more important aspect. Now, I can relate that, and if Mark was sitting here, he'd say the same thing to Mark and my relationship. There's things that we'll talk about, but only at a certain level, because we both know where there's no point in going beyond there, and we don't.
So this morning I was thinking about the conversation that you had with Van, where you went and said, we both love your daughter, and there's no point in having an adversarial relationship or non-existent. He said how big-headed of you to think that you have it all figured out. And
that's the conversation that's
Yeah.
in the book. Yeah, well, when his son thinks of that, because his son and I have talked about that numerous times, that conversation, because it was significant to Mark for sure. The choice of his words, Mark says he should have used a different word than arrogant. Okay. And, and I appreciate where Mark's coming from. But that's what he used. He used that word twice. And I don't know where my response came from, Marshall, because I had never really thought of it. Now, here I am, I'm 44, 5 years old, and I have been an atheist for much of that time. Although I was raised initially, go to church each Sunday, So I had heard and been engaged in a lot of conversations. And so Van, being as intelligent and rational and knowledgeable as he was, well, I knew that he'd probably heard all of the things that I might say in response to his initial opening remark, right? His serve, as Mark would say. So I was, in addition to being emotionally, what's the right word? He had ignited my emotions because of the issue at stake. Julie and her family and me. That was the issue. And I had already decided before I went over there that I was not going to let him in any way think worse of me than he already might have did. So I was not, my subconscious was not reminding me of other responses I had had to such challenges in the past. And so I was searching for what might I say in response. And that came out. I don't know why. In retrospect, it was perfect. He was trying to intimidate and bully me, and I just somehow turned it right back on him and caused him pause.
Well, I think there's a pretty good life lesson there, too, when it comes to interacting with other people, which is sometimes it benefits you to put something out there and then sit back and just shut up.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, my problem, one of my problems in life, Marshall, is that one's past is always there. And I mean past in the broadest of senses, not just your experiences, but the contents of your soul. Now, religious people, Dave, why do you use soul? Well, I understand what soul is referring to and presume that a lot of them don't. Okay? I do. I will be arrogant and say I understand. Okay? So my response to Van, I had already just told my soul, whatever you do, don't screw up. Yet there's part of my past, Marshall, that if the value was not so critical and important to me, emotionally, my response to him in saying that might have been something far different. Like, you're going to bully me? Well, let me show you what bullying is. You don't sweat much for a fat guy. And that's a compliment. Right? That's my go-to example. But all I'm saying is that knowing myself as I did not want the me that used to be to come out. Because the value in question was too important to me. And I would not surrender it or risk it for something that to me was nowhere near as important, but to him was. When you behave or think in a manner that you subsequently decide is an error, you made a mistake, hopefully the consequences are dominated by consequences to you and not to others. Okay? Because you can correct yours and not do it again, or be aware of it and try not to do it again and fail miserably again, okay? However many times. But a mistake, mistakes in general, you should use, I believe, as something on which to stand and not something you let bury you. Now, I acknowledge, if you have done something wrong and you've hurt someone else badly, irreparably, in case of physical mistakes, that's tough. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and to my knowledge, I've never harmed anyone from which they couldn't recover if they wanted to. I've never had an accident where I caused someone physical harm that I'm aware of, that they're suffering the rest of their life for. And unfortunately, I've never killed anyone or caused them to die. The closest I've come is working in the Air Force and watching the bomber take off, knowing when they came back, the two guns that my system aimed that are on the rear of the plane, ammo would be gone from them. And I asked one of the co-pilots one time when they came back, yeah, you got some ammo missing. He said, oh, we're just making sure the guns are working. Now, they overflew Cuba for 2 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't know what they did. If they did anything bad while they were over Cuba, that would certainly be classified. And I don't know of anything.
Yeah.
But I do know there was ammunition gone from them 20 millimeter cannons.
Well, Dave, I've taken a lot of your time today. Anything you want to wrap this up with?
I guess I would say, Marshall, that you're talking about ideas that have been triggered by our relationship, not just my book. When I decided that I needed to write more than one book, what you're now covering are issues that will be in my next book. And it's not going to be given to hardly anyone, maybe a couple people, I don't know. It'll be for sale to the benefit of my heirs, or detriment of my heirs, right? But it's going to contain that which I have come to believe is of primary importance in a human being living their life to the extent they want to also enjoy and be fulfilled by it. Because I'm already in what I term in my first book there, sudden death overtime. And as the overtime ends, I can say that while there's things I regret, I think everyone regrets things, it's been a great run. And I hope that shows on me more than the opposite. Because I see the opposite on an awful lot of people. And it saddens me and disappoints me. And I like to go, I'd like to think that I've gone into some of the reasons they don't have to do that or endure that in my next book.
Well, I'll say that it certainly does show on you, Dave. If it didn't, I wouldn't be sitting here. So
Well, thank you, Marshall. I'll take that as a compliment.
Appreciate that. Appreciate the time.
Me too.